I'm so excited to share with you the Greek world of the Homeric Chronicles. If you watched the movie Troy and loved it, or love to hate it as I do, or if you're currently watching the BBC One's Troy Fall of a City, or waiting for it to hit your Netflix playlist like I am, this podcast is for you. You're a Myrmidon. Basically, if you love Greek mythology in any form, you've come to the right place. Shall we get started? When I first began toying with the idea, what if you could read all about the Greek mythological stories as one seamless tale? I thought, what if George R.R. Martin was telling it? It would be epic, like crazy, huge. Can you imagine the cast of characters? It would be a celebrity who's who of the ancient mytho-historic Greek world. And because I love these stories, I got to thinking, what if I wrote it? I thought, nah, I can't do that. That's too big. Then I thought, well, you have a degree in history. Why not try it? And the Homeric Chronicles was born. That brought me to the million-dollar question. Where to start? How to begin? After piles of research, 25 gray hairs carefully dyed dark brown, and a bazillion cups of coffee later, I realized exactly where I needed to start. With Homer. But not just some retelling that was meant to get you to the Great War or to take you through the bizarre journeys of Odysseus back to Ithaca. It needed to be more, much more. But Homer's work in the Iliad and Odyssey definitely provide the backbone of the Homeric Chronicles. I wove a lot of other stories that touched on the characters in Homer's work into the overall structure. The major heroes and heroines of Homer's tales are entwined with so many other characters. I had to make a lot of hard choices because it is chronological. The original myth makers weren't worried about telling stories that made chronological sense outside of the story that they were currently reciting. But for the Homeric Chronicles to be what I envisioned, that's exactly what I had to do. I wanted to include all the regulars: Achilles, Paris, Hector, Odysseus, Menelaus, Agamemnon, Helen, Hecuba, Cassandra, Clytemnestra, along with lesser-known characters like Palamedes, the poor guy who unfortunately pissed off Odysseus, Tantalus, the first husband of Clytemnestra, Oenone, Paris's first wife, Pisidice, the Methymnian princess who fell in love with Achilles. Well, you get the picture. Now, I was tasked with putting these myths in chronological order and to keep all the characters and chronology easy to connect with. It wasn't until I fell in love with George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire that I knew structuring a story of this epic scale was truly possible. I take you along several characters' journeys through 5 major kingdoms. And after the movie Troy ruthlessly cut them out, I put the pantheon of gods and goddesses back in. I sometimes wonder if David Benioff wishes that he hadn't cut all the gods out of Troy. That's another story. Let's on to the chronology. The first chronological hiccup involved Helen, Paris, and Achilles. Let's start with Paris in particular, the Judgement of Paris. Most people familiar with the story assume that Paris gives the judgment of the fairest goddess to Aphrodite and leaves to Sparta not long after. But it just doesn't make any sense this way, not in the context of the larger epic tale. Let me explain. The Golden Apple contest that caused Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera to seek Paris as the judge occurred at the wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis. These are Achilles' parents. So Achilles, the greatest fighter of all the Greeks, hasn't been born yet. He's the star of the Iliad. So the Judgement of Paris takes place soon after the wedding feast, before Achilles is conceived and born. Why does this matter? Because we have to wait at least 15 to 18 years for Achilles to grow up, get trained, father a son, before Odysseus can discover him on Skyros, dressed like a girl, and call our hero into action. This means 2 things. Paris has to be at least 15 or 18 years old to be considered man enough to judge the goddesses. He's not an 8-year-old judging 3 of the most powerful females in the story. Therefore, Paris is 15 to 18 years older than Achilles. Most movies and books depict Paris and Achilles at about the same age, or, as in Troy, making Paris much younger than Achilles. But it's all wrong. Paris is definitely Achilles' elder. Here's an excerpt of the Judgement of Paris from the Song of Princes, Book 1 of the Homeric Chronicles. Paris nodded. You offer me a woman who hasn't seen the light of our world? She will, Aphrodite promised. Trust me, she will. Paris considered his life. Since the cave incident, he'd chosen to live most of his days peacefully with Oenone. Their marriage he considered a sacred bond. She'd revealed to him the gentle ways a woman loves a man, coaxing him, encouraging him to rise to ecstatic heights. His body had never felt such pleasure. He'd no desire to leave the nymph for realm, war, or another love. Yet he understood that he must judge. If I choose Hera, I'll have to leave Oenone. If I choose Athena, I'll become someone who I'm not. War brings only misery. If I choose Aphrodite, my life will be my own for years to come. Perhaps she will forget in time or let me refuse in the future. I've made my decision, Paris said. I choose Aphrodite's gift. That raises the next logical question. When does Paris meet and woo Helen? Because this is the event that brings the Argives, the Achaeans, and the Danaans to Troy. Paris couldn't have taken off with Helen anytime soon following the judgment, because that would mean Paris and Helen would have been in Troy for years before Menelaus even tried to get her back. Because we'd be waiting for Achilles to get born and come of age. Even if you take the whole Paris and Helen getting lost in Egypt into consideration, that still leaves too many years in between the kidnapping and the attempted rescue. Remember, no matter what, Achilles has to be old enough to lead the Myrmidons and father the child before he goes to Troy, as a lot of other prophecies depend on it. My research took me to Apollodorus, a 2nd century AD compilation of ancient texts, which states in 3.13.8 that Achilles was 9 when he was taken to Skyros, and he was taken there because Odysseus was looking for him due to a prophecy by Agamemnon's seer Calchas. There is some consensus that Achilles left Skyros at about 15, but let's break it down chronologically and logically. Number 1, if Odysseus is looking for Achilles when Achilles is 9, and that's why Thetis hid him as a girl, then he has to be hiding there for years before he's old enough to get the Princess Didamia pregnant. So, for all these years, what are the Greeks assembled under Agamemnon's banner doing in Aulis? Twiddling their thumbs, sewing sails, getting sunburns? If the consensus is correct, and we have to make choices to be consistent, at least 6 years have to pass until Odysseus finds Achilles. Number 2, I recall reading that there were 2 calls to war that met at Aulis. The first one, which assembled the Greek tribes, went to Aulis, and that one was a bust because they needed Achilles, so everyone went home and waited, and then returned years later after Achilles was found? This doesn't make any sense. It would have been a monumental feat getting that many ships and men from all across the Greek world assembled just once. But twice? And in all his searching, Odysseus never makes it back to Ithaca to sneak in a little love time with Penelope, the woman he can't stop talking about? I don't buy it. Number 3. What makes sense in the human and mytho-historic terms is that Achilles is 9 or somewhere thereabouts when he goes to Skyros with Thetis, fully aware that Achilles has a dual fate and that someday he'd have a huge decision to make. When the call to Aulis came, 6 or so years later, that's when Odysseus finds him. That gives Achilles time to grow up, father a son. I do give Achilles a few more years, rounding out his age to 18. Why? Because I use the historic figure Alexander the Great as a model. Alexander distinguished himself at the Battle of Chaeronea at age 18. So it makes sense that a young man at 18 could indeed be seen as a leader of an army of warriors as renowned as the Myrmidons. Well, Myrmidons, time's up for today. Up next, let's take a deeper look into Helen's age and how placing her story in chronological sequence was challenging, but not impossible. For now, what do you think about Paris being 18 years older than Achilles? That Helen couldn't have been born at the time of the Judgment. How do you think a comprehensive timeline will change up the Greek myths you know so well? You could find out by reading the Homeric Chronicles. Book 1, Song of Princes, and Book 2, Rise of Princes. You can find those at Amazon. Love to hear your thoughts, answer questions, and connect with my fellow geeky Greek mythology lovers. You can visit me at my webpage, JanelleRhiannon.com. Find me on my Twitter, more than I care to admit, at The Raven Angel. My Instagram is Janelle_Rhiannon, and Facebook, Janelle Rhiannon Author Page. Until next time, let's take the advice given to Menelaus in the Cypria. Know that the gods made wine the best thing for mortal man to scatter cares. Drink your wine and be merry, Myrmidons.